Hello everyone, and welcome to the re-released 154th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring the cultists from Rosemary's Baby. Last year for the month of October, I started the month off with the Antichrist, so I figured then that it would be appropriate to end the month with the Antichrist. However, Paramount, who owns the rights to this film, was so thoroughly convinced that the original video, out of all the videos I've ever made that looked exactly like that one, was the one that could have allowed all of you to watch crucial points in their film. Which I get it. You can really game the system by watching a video that mashes random 10-second clips from throughout a film while a guy talks over all of them. So they were totally in the right for having that video removed. Right, guys? Right. So, because we don't want that to happen again, this video is going to be entirely made up of still images from the film, which is something I've been doing in a few videos recently if you all hadn't noticed, as these studios have really started to ramp up their claims. Now as you can see, it's taken me a while to get this video back up, but with Apartment 7A's recent release, I wanted to see if any of the information we got there needed to be added to this video. And surprisingly, not really. So sorry for the wait, everyone. Rosemary's Baby is one of the most fantastic horror films ever made, and within, we find a story layered with the struggles of a woman against the forces of darkness that expertly intermixes the supernatural with the strife she must face in the world away from her home that she finds herself in. Whereas The Omen gives us excellent insight into what vile powers might do once the Antichrist is born, Rosemary's Baby provides us with a greater window into the development of the Antichrist, showing us the circumstances and methods utilized by those who wish to see the day of his birth, as they attempt to pass themselves off as nothing more than helpful neighbors and concerned citizens. In this video, we're going to run through all the dreaded details of the nefarious plot to turn Rosemary Woodhouse from hopeful housewife into mother of the damned, and to do so, we're going to be taking a look at everything we're given in the film, as well as what little information was left out of the film that we can find in the book, so we can better understand all the evil present within this story. Now, as much as I'd like to include everything related to this story in this video, like the sequels in the remake series, overall, they kind of suck. And in many people's opinion, including my own, the masterpiece that is the original is best left alone, and the other adaptations or sequels forgotten. So that's just what I've done in this video. If a majority of you would really like me to talk about those stories, let me know down below, and I'll make an update video at some point in the future. But you know who else sucks? Roman Polanski. And just with any other character or story I choose to examine, this video is not meant to celebrate that man or his crimes, and I thoroughly condemn him as strongly as I possibly can. But as a faithful and well-made adaptation of Ira Levin's beautiful story, this film should be given merit for what it is, despite the hands that crafted it, and I'm sure most of you who've seen it will agree. But before we get you back into this episode, let's talk about our sponsor for this video, Rocket Money. We all know every dollar we have counts now more than ever, and it's important that all of us keep up with our finances. But even for the most financially literate amongst us, things can sometimes fall to the wayside as life presents you with one of its many hurdles. And that's where Rocket Money comes in to help lighten the load. With Rocket Money, you gain access to a whole host of streamlined tools like a budget management feature, and you can even upload a photo of any of your bills like your cable and phone bills to the app to let Rocket Money negotiate them for you to get a better rate. One of my favorite features though has to be their subscription canceller. Everyone is trying to get you to subscribe to something now, even your toothbrush. And while subscriptions are fantastic when you want them, when you don't, well, that little bit of extra money getting siphoned out of your account each month, without you even knowing, can really add up. Rocket Money has helped me cancel numerous unwanted subscriptions in just a few taps, which has saved me hours of headache and some cash to boot. And I've also been quite pleased with their ability to negotiate my bills for me, as both my phone bill and my internet bill have been lowered significantly thanks to Rocket Money. Rocket Money has helped save its customers up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features, and they've saved millions of people over $500 million at this point, with just canceled subscriptions alone. But don't just take my word for it. Save more and spend less by joining the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today by clicking the link down below or by heading to rocketmoney.com/vileeye to get started for free. And you can also unlock even more features with their premium packages. So don't wait. Start taking control of your finances with Rocket Money today by heading to rocketmoney.com/vileeye or by clicking the link down below. Thank you, Rocket Money, for sponsoring this video. Now without further ado, let's begin. The story of Rosemary's Baby is centered around the fictional Bramford apartment building in New York City, an eerie, run-down, yet beautiful German Renaissance-style building whose history is steeped in the demonic and the satanic, or more appropriately, the occult. At the beginning of this story, we're given an overview of some of the more eccentric and diabolical characters who have lived in this building since the late 19th century by Rosemary and Guy's friend Hutch. It would seem that the first duo to defile this building were the Trench sisters, who Hutch describes as two proper Victorian ladies who were occasional cannibals. They cooked and ate several young children, including a niece. Now that's quite the dark stain on a building's history, but it would appear that such a mark was just the right thing to attract the next dubious tenant of the Bramford, Adrian Marcato. a purported Satanist who claimed to have summoned Satan and was chased out of the Bramford by an angry mob in 1896. From here, it would seem that there were a string of unfortunate events at the Bramford, like a marked increase in suicides when compared to other houses of comparable size and age. And in 1959, a dead infant was found wrapped in newspaper in the basement. And of course, Adrian wasn't the last unscrupulous person that the public was aware of who lived in this building, as Hutch mentions a man by the name of Keith Kennedy and the parties he held, as well as a woman named Pearl Ames. But we're never given more detail regarding what exactly they did during the time they lived at the Bramford. Now, the numerous incidents that have occurred at the Bramford, as well as the legacy of the miscreants who once lived there, is central to our story. But in order to gain a deeper understanding of why this building is such a hotspot for nefarious activity, we need to examine the life and legacy of the man who served as an accelerant for all these tragic events, including the events of this story, Adrian Marcato. In the book that Rosemary inherits from Hutch, All of Them Witches, we're given the following biography on Mr. Marcato. Born in Glasgow in 1846, he was soon after brought to New York. He resided for several years in the United States, but spent a great deal of his time on the continent and in travel. He was educated at Oxford, and during the course of his studies, he became interested in black magic. Soon he left England and devoted himself completely to Satanism. The peak of his popularity was in 1896, when he claimed to have called forth Satan and was attacked by a mob outside the Bramford. He had to leave New York soon after. Similar happenings occurred in Stockholm in 1898 and in Paris in 1899. In the film, there's more text to read after this description on the same page and on the following one, but it would seem that the filmmakers pasted their description of Marcato over the text of an existing book, and thus what follows after has nothing to do with Adrian. However, on the second page, we are shown a photograph of Adrian, his wife Hesia, and his son Stephen at a Paris cafe, who is still alive and well under the name Roman Castevet, the other half of the kindly yet eccentric Castevet couple that carry on his legacy. But another excerpt from Hutch that's given to us when Guy asks him what the cause of all the strange circumstances at the Bramford could be is quite the apt explanation as to why Adrian chose to take up residence here. "What's the answer, Hutch?" Guy said, playing serious and concerned. "There must be some kind of explanation." Hutch looked at him for a moment. "I don't know," he said. "Perhaps it's simply that the notoriety of a pair of trench sisters attracts an Adrian Marcato, and his notoriety attracts a Keith Kennedy, and eventually a house becomes a kind of rallying place for people who are more prone than others to certain types of behavior. Or perhaps there are things we don't know yet about magnetic fields, or electrons, or whatever, ways in which a place can quite literally be malign." With this in mind, the most plausible explanation for Adrian choosing to live at the Bramford would indeed seem to be the crimes of the Trench sisters, as perhaps with his advanced understanding of the occult, Adrian found at the Bramford a nexus of evil energy that would serve to further the realization of his ultimate goal, the birth of the son of Satan, the Antichrist. Considering that Adrian supposedly summoned the devil at one point, it would make sense that this wasn't his original intent, but that he actually received this charge from Satan himself, a dark purpose to usher in the end of the age of the Son of God by fulfilling this ancient prophecy for his Lord and Master. Now, of course, such a goal would have led Adrian to committing all sorts of horrendous actions in the name of his new god, and we know that Adrian was drawn to the Bramford because of the actions of the Trench sisters. But can we reasonably claim that all the horrid things that occurred after his arrival were the direct result of his actions, or the actions of his followers? I believe we can, and we need look no further than the attempted use of Terry Giannoffrio as the host for the Antichrist by Adrian's heir, Stephen. Terry was a down-on-her-luck addict who the Castevets had found living on the streets, a woman who they'd taken in out of what appeared to have been goodwill. But they were in actuality preparing her to become the vessel for the Antichrist, and when she found out about this, she chose to end her life. So when you consider that Adrian's son Stephen is attempting to continue his legacy, and that he's doing so by trying to lure in women who might serve as suitable mothers for Satan's child, I think it's fair to assume that most, if not all, the suicides that occurred in this building happened for much the same reasons that Terry's suicide occurred. And while we still have no way of verifying whether or not all the past suicides that took place in this building resulted from the actions of Adrian and his followers, it would only make sense that the reason that the Bramford suicide rate is so high is because of this cult's repeated attempts at finding a suitable host for the Antichrist. With that in mind, what we have here is a building that's essentially been infested by evil, as not only did Adrian leave his mark on the Bramford with his own activities, but as we see throughout this story, there are several people who are a member of Adrian and his son's cult, like Laura Louise, and even Mrs. Gardenia, the woman who lived in Rosemary and Guy's apartment before passing away shortly before this story began. A woman who was likely once a member of the cult, but had a change of heart prior to her death. as we see that she chose to block off the closet that led to the Castavets' apartment in order to distance herself from them. And she also wrote on a notepad the sentence, "I can no longer associate myself," which could be a nod to the notion that she might have had dementia before she died and could no longer remember who she was, or more likely, she could no longer associate herself with Stephen and his cult. Since Mrs. Gardenia was supposedly quite healthy prior to her demise, and she died after being in a coma for several weeks like Hutch, who had a spell put on him that caused him to fall ill later on in this story, we can assume that once Mrs. Gardenia severed her ties to the Castavets, that a similar curse was placed upon her, which then allowed for the events of this story to occur when Guy and Rosemary moved into her apartment. However, it's not just a coincidental adjacency to the Castavets that causes the Woodhouses to become involved in their plot. And to understand how Rosemary and Guy get caught up in all the dreaded evil of the satanic cult in this film, one must first look to who they are as individuals and who they are as one. We aren't given too much of Rosemary's backstory in the film, but we do know that she comes from Omaha, Nebraska, grew up as a Catholic, and that she has a large family consisting of 3 brothers and 2 sisters, as well as 20 nieces and nephews. However, in the novel, we're given far more information about what Rosemary's relationship is to her family and why she came to New York. When Rosemary had first come to New York in June of 1962, she had joined another Omaha girl and 2 girls from Atlanta in an apartment on Lower Lexington Avenue. Hutch lived next door, and though he declined to be the full-time father substitute the girls would have made him, he had raised 2 daughters of his own, and that was quite enough, thank you. He was nonetheless on hand in emergencies, such as the night someone was on the fire escape, and the time Jean almost choked to death. His name was Edward Hutchins. He was English. He was 54. Under 3 different pen names, he wrote 3 different series of boys' adventure books. To Rosemary, he gave another sort of emergency assistance. She was the youngest of 6 children, the other 5 of whom had married early and made homes close to their parents. Behind her in Omaha, she had left an angry, suspicious father, a silent mother, and 4 resenting brothers and sisters. Only the next to oldest, Brian, who had a drink problem, had said, "Go on, Rosie, do what you want to do," and had slipped her a plastic handbag with $85 in it. In New York, Rosemary felt guilty and selfish, and Hutch bucked her up with strong teas and talks about parents and children and one's duty to oneself. This information paints Rosemary as the black sheep of her family, the girl who eschewed her traditional Catholic family values in favor of running off to the big city to find adventure and excitement, and in the process, marrying a Protestant man that further caused a divide between her and her family. However, from Rosemary's dialogue and motivations, we get the feeling that she wants to get back into her family's good graces, which becomes apparent when you consider her main objective seems to be starting a family, something that Rosemary doubtlessly hopes will please her family. And while their falling out wasn't malicious on Rosemary's part, and she was really just following her heart more than anything, it certainly was a conscious decision by her family to ostracize her, and Rosemary never wanted that to be the case. What all this tells us is something intimately important to Rosemary's character, that being that aside from Guy and the few friends she's made, Rosemary has absolutely no family in New York, and thus no one else to lean on for support. Why this makes her situation all the more precarious is because of the kind of person Guy is. Guy is a bitter, self-centered narcissist who is unsatisfied with what he's accomplished so far as an actor. Instead of starring in big Hollywood productions, Guy has instead found some small success as a play actor, as well as with side character work in TV shows and by starring in commercials. A man who's full of himself that's been forced to watch men who he believes to be lesser than he be granted roles that he thinks should have gone to him. Though Guy tries to make up for some of his misgivings in a few different ways, on the whole, Guy wants to do what Guy wants to do, and he's cynical and condescending towards people who irritate him simply by existing. He makes love without any care for Rosemary's wants or needs, and he's more obsessed with his own career than anything else, which is both the reason why Guy is initially annoyed by the suggestion of having dinner with 2 old-timers, and why he suddenly changes his tune after he's had more intimate conversations with Roman. As we're shown though, all it takes for Guy to become interested in the Castavets is a few small promises from Roman of something greater, of powers unknown to him that can rocket him from obscurity to the heights of success, which he does after he takes the Castavets up on their offer to place a curse on Donald Baumgart, a man who was chosen over Guy for a role in a production. And it's through Guy's reckless ambition that the Castavets and their cult are able to grab hold of Guy and subsequently Rosemary. In the beginning of this plot, Rosemary is extraordinarily vulnerable to the machinations of her husband and this cult, as initially, she has no reason to mistrust any of them. So slowly but surely, Rosemary is brought under their sway via her proximity to Tannis root, the fictional plant that this cult uses to dull their victims' senses to make them more complacent, negligent, and agreeable. By the time that the cult decides that they're ready to couple Rosemary with Satan, she's effectively dulled to the point that the odd suggestions and actions of these people seem slightly strange, but otherwise innocent. So when Guy throws a fit and calls her ungrateful when she doesn't want to partake in the chocolate mousse Minnie has prepared for her, she thinks nothing of it, just temperamental Guy being fussy as usual. What ensues after Rosemary ingests this poison-laced concoction is one of the most insidiously helpless scenes that we've ever been given in cinematic history. A scene where Rosemary, surrounded by nude cultists, is forced to couple with Satan against her will as a nightmarish whirlwind of imagery flies through her head while this demonic ritual takes place, an act that infests her with the son of the Lord of Evil himself. Following her impregnation, a push and pull battle between the forces allied to the Castavets and Rosemary ensues. Initially, Rosemary is that same vulnerable woman who can't help but acquiesce to the wishes of the people that she believes mean well, and as she partakes in her daily vitamin concoction on the orders of Dr. Saperstein, and her mental clarity worsens due to the influence of the Tannis root, great bodily harm begins to show on Rosemary's person. Yet still, even during these initial stages of great pain and hardship, she continues to unwittingly go along with the plans of the cult. After all, if she can't rely on herself at the moment, and she's forced to rely on those closest to her, who else can she turn to? Hutch? That's a fine enough solution in any given moment, but she doesn't live with Hutch. She lives with Guy, and the only other people who consistently show any care for her are the Castavets, who we know she can't really rely on. However, Rosemary isn't a hapless and naive victim that's incapable of altering her situation. Far from it, and it's through great effort on her part that she manages to put a great deal of distance between herself and the harmful elements working against her. One of the first instances of her self-determination is presented to us in a sequence that was unfortunately left out of the film. Immediately after the ritual scene, Rosemary wakes up dazed and confused as Guy tries to brush off her wounds as advances he had made upon her while she was unconscious because he didn't want to miss baby night. Because of the true nature of this event, Guy has become distant, brushing off the fact that he won't even look at her as being busy with his career, and his self-absorbed behavior, in combination with the idea that he had assaulted her while she was unconscious, drives Rosemary to have Hutch assist her in escaping to Hutch's vacation cabin for a few days to sort things out. She left on the morning of Saturday, October 16th, and stayed 5 days at the cabin. The first 2 days, she never once thought about Guy, a fitting revenge for the cheerfulness with which he had agreed to her going. Did she look as if she needed a good rest? Very well, she would have one, a long one, never once thinking about him. She took walks through dazzling yellow and orange woods, went to sleep early and slept late, read Flight of the Falcon by Daphne du Maurier, and made glutton's meals on the bottled gas stove, never once thinking about him. On the third day, she thought about him. He was vain, self-centered, shallow, and deceitful. He had married her to have an audience, not a mate. She would give him a year to shape up and become a good husband. If he didn't make it, she would pull out, and with no religious qualms whatever. And meanwhile, she would go back to work and get again that sense of independence and self-sufficiency that she had been so eager to get rid of. She would be strong and proud and ready to go if he failed to meet her standards. Those glutton's meals, man-sized cans of beef stew and chili con carne, began to disagree with her, and on that third day, she was mildly nauseated and could only eat soup and crackers. On the fourth day, she awoke missing him and cried. What was she doing there alone in that cold, crummy cabin? What had he done that was so terrible? He had gotten drunk and had grabbed her without saying, "May I?" Well, that was really an earth-shaking offense, now wasn't it? There he was, facing the biggest challenge of his career. Instead of being there to help him, to cue and encourage him, was off in the middle of nowhere, eating herself sick and feeling sorry for herself. Sure, he was vain and self-centered. He was an actor, wasn't he? Laurence Olivier was probably vain and self-centered. And yes, he might lie now and then. Wasn't that exactly what had attracted her, and still did? That freedom and nonchalance that was so different from her own boxed-in propriety. She drove into Brewster and called him. Service answered. "Oh, hi, dear. Are you back from the country?" "Oh, Guy is out, dear. Can he call you? You'll call him at 5. "Right. You've certainly got lovely weather. Are you enjoying yourself?" "Good." At 5 he was still out, her message waiting for him. She ate in a diner and went to the one movie theater. At 9 he was still out, and Service was someone new and automatic with a message for her. She should call him before 8 the next morning, or after 6 in the evening. That next day, she reached what seemed like a sensible and realistic view of things. They were both at fault, he for being thoughtless and self-absorbed, she for failing to express and explain her discontent. He could hardly be expected to change until she showed him that change was called for. She had only to talk. No, they had only to talk. for he might be harboring a similar discontent of which she was similarly unaware, and matters couldn't help but improve. Like so many unhappinesses, this one had begun with silence in the place of honest open talk. Now, while all of this goes a long way in showing us that Rosemary won't simply lay down when confronted with adversity, this also reinforces the notion that Rosemary is ultimately a woman who's alone in the new world she lives in, and that her loneliness combined with her desire to make something of her marriage and her desired family life causes her to constantly doubt her relationship to Guy and the Castovets. Though this is true, Rosemary is shown making great effort to combat the forces of evil working against her. Rosemary is shown making great effort to combat the forces of evil working against her and to be her own person despite all that's happening to her, especially after she receives the book All of Them Witches from Hutch following his demise. Even so, the greatest problem Rosemary faces in this story is how pervasive this cult seems to be in all aspects of her life. Rosemary can scarcely turn her head without coming into contact with the Castovets or some of their underlings, and when going up against a power that has access to unholy magic, the prospects of winning out become ever more slim. Combine this with the fact that these people are adept at projecting themselves as everyday citizens, and Rosemary finds herself battling not just with these people directly, but with her own sanity, as she's constantly made to question whether or not she's delusional and hysterical, or if all these dreaded things are actually happening, not to mention the apparent effects that her gestating child is having on her, like her compulsion to eat raw meat. But Rosemary also has something monumental working against her alongside all these nefarious things: society itself. At the time this story takes place, women were caught in the throes of a turning point in American society. Feminism was experiencing a resurgence in the 1960s, which was referred to as the Second Wave, or the Women's Liberation Movement, and the fight for social equality for women was raging against the established gender roles that had dominated society for thousands of years. Because of this, we find Rosemary expressing herself in the way she wants to, despite the protestations of her husband or the limits that he or the people around him are trying to place on her. But because of how entrenched the patriarchal structure of society is within the people around her, a lot of her independence is either denied, ridiculed, or made impossible. And just how debilitating this is no more apparent than when Rosemary seeks help from Dr. Hill. When Rosemary goes to Dr. Hill with information about the plot against her and her baby, he initially seems understanding and promises to help her. However, after some time has passed, Guy and Dr. Saperstein arrive to take her back to the apartment with them, a betrayal undertaken by Dr. Hill because he assumed that Rosemary was delusional and hysterical, which, given the circumstances, is understandable, as anyone would be suspicious of a woman explaining that she was at the center of a Satanist plot. However, this is also an instance of a man assuming that a woman is just being high-strung and out of her mind, and the only solution for that problem is to of course call her husband so he can handle her. Thus, after all she'd been through, after all the danger she'd put herself in to reach the only person she thought could help her in her moment of need, Rosemary is ultimately denied the assistance she needs because of male bias, a harrowing reminder of how many people in need have been left to rot because of the circumstances of their birth. The result of all these things ends up being that, try as she might, Rosemary ultimately fails to stop the advent of the demonic force growing within her, though she does manage to circumvent the cult's attempts to hide her child away from her. And depending on whether you're reading the book or watching the film, her reaction to seeing her baby for the first time varies slightly. In the film, Rosemary initially reacts with utter terror once she sets her eyes on her devil spawn, but in both the film and the book, she does steel herself and accepts her new role as mother of the Antichrist. After all, why resist? Her family is now foreign to her. There's no one left in this city aside from these people who she can confide in. She was chosen by these people and by an otherworldly power to embody all their hopes and dreams, and in return, she's granted the child she had always wanted, who promises to make her life a mesmerizing world of fantasy made reality. A woman who's now poised to ascend to heights greater than her family could have ever imagined, alongside her son, the son of the devil himself. And so Rosemary, via the allure of reobtaining the family she had once lost, succumbs to the temptation of these human beasts, people who in turn fell victim to the overarching desire that binds all of these conspirators together, the desire for power, to transcend the limits imposed upon man by their creator and obtain the might of his greatest enemy. People who on the surface appear to be just as average as you or I, people who manage to convince this poor young woman that they indeed are, which in the end makes this story a sinister reminder that it's not always the monster creeping in the dark that you have to worry about, or the bloodthirsty maniac charging at you with blood dripping from his chin. Sometimes it's the people right in front of your face, the ones you love, the ones that you trust more than anyone else in the world, people with a smile on their face and a knife behind their back who think only of themselves and what powers they can achieve if they only dedicate their lives to evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Rosemary's Baby? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, and anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.